The Old West, justice was often delivered by gunfire, but sometimes it was love that pulled the trigger. This is the tale of Rosa Valdez, a woman shaped by pain, strengthened by purpose, and driven by the courage to protect what she loved. Welcome to Souls of the Old West. The knock at the door came as a surprise. It wasn't just the storm that made it strange. Sudden downpours weren't rare in the western mountains, but the sheer desperation in it. 3 sharp raps, unhesitating. Not like a traveler asking for shelter, but like someone whose very life depended on the door opening. Jonas McRae rose slowly from his chair, laying aside the book he wasn't really reading. His revolver was still on the wall, dusty, untouched for years, a choice he had forced himself to make every day. When he opened the door, a woman stood there, soaked to the skin, her arms wrapped around her swollen belly. She was clearly pregnant, close to bursting, and by the look on her face, the child was not far behind. She was Gordina, curvy in a way that looked natural and strong, not soft. Her red hair clung to her cheeks in wet strands, and her lips trembled more from pain than cold. "Please," she said, voice nearly lost in the rain. "I need help." Jonas didn't answer right away. He studied her, not suspicious but calculating. In a different life, he would have turned her away. But he wasn't that man anymore, or at least, he was trying not to be. Rosa Valdez didn't wait for permission. She stepped inside as he moved aside, water puddling beneath her boots on the wood floor. She scanned the small cabin, taking in the stove, the table, the pile of chopped wood by the hearth. There was a cot against the far wall and a quilt laid across the back of a chair. Her breathing was shallow, and Jonas could see the tension in her shoulders. "Contractions started early this morning," she said, lowering herself onto the cot without asking. "I kept walking, but now I can't anymore." Jonas crouched beside her. "You got a doctor nearby?" She shook her head, pressing her hand to her belly. "Only you." He should have said no. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't anything for this. But something in her eyes, maybe the resolve not to die here, made him act. He brought water, towels, whatever clean cloth he had. She gave him her name between clenched teeth as another wave of pain struck. "Rosa Valdez." "Jonas," he answered. "McRae." That was the end of the introductions. There wasn't time for more. The birth had begun. The labor was fast and brutal. Rosa barely made a sound, biting down on a folded piece of cloth as Jonas helped deliver the child. He worked in silence, hands steady despite the panic that scratched at the back of his mind. He had seen death, brought it with his own hands, but he had never seen life enter the world. Blood soaked the blankets and Rosa's breath came in gasps. Her strength, he would realize later, was something rare. She never cried out for anyone, not God, not a man, not even herself. She just held on, determined to live long enough to see the child's face. When the baby finally emerged, slick and red and trembling, Jonas wrapped her in a worn piece of flannel and cut the cord with his old hunting knife. Rosa collapsed back, eyes fluttering, breath shallow but stable. "Is she all right?" she whispered. Jonas looked down at the child. A girl, healthy from all appearances, but her eyes were open already, wide open, and what he saw in them made his stomach twist. They were the wrong color, not brown or green, not even blue. They were gray, not cloudy or dull, but almost metallic, like polished silver reflecting a firelight that wasn't there. The baby stared straight at him, unblinking, and Jonas felt the unmistakable weight of memory. Years ago, in a smoky saloon in Santarena, a man named Cristo Mendoza had looked at him with eyes just like these. Right before Jonas shot him through the chest over a poker hand and a whispered insult. Mendoza's eyes had stared at him even as the life left them, and Jonas had never forgotten. Now those same eyes, not similar, not reminiscent but identical, were staring up at him from the face of a newborn. He swallowed hard, masking his reaction as best he could. "She's fine," he told Rosa, handing the baby to her gently. "Strong." Rosa's arms wrapped around the child like she'd been born to do it. Her whole body softened. She smiled, and for a moment, there was peace. But Jonas couldn't unsee it. As Rosa held the child close, murmuring something in Spanish that Jonas didn't catch, he stepped back, He moved to the window, a habit, and stared out into the rain, though he wasn't seeing anything out there. The storm was just noise now. The only thing that mattered was inside this cabin. He reached up and touched the scar just beneath his collarbone, the one Mendoza's brother had given him years after Cristo died. That family didn't forget. They didn't forgive. And if there was any chance this child was blood to Mendoza, there was danger in her tiny heartbeat. But Jonas also knew what kind of man Mendoza had been. Charming, ruthless, manipulative. He could imagine the kind of lies he'd told Rosa. If this baby was his, she'd never know the truth. Jonas wouldn't allow it. He had buried that past deep, and he wasn't about to let it dig itself up. Rosa spoke again, softer this time as the baby fell asleep on her chest. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to help me." Jonas turned from the window and sat slowly at the table. "I didn't," he agreed. He picked up the mug of cold coffee, held it for a moment, then set it back down. "But I did." Rosa didn't ask more. She didn't need to. The storm outside raged on, but in that room something had shifted. Two strangers had crossed a line between survival and connection. Jonas couldn't name it, didn't want to, but he felt it. Still, he couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. The child's eyes weren't normal. They were a message, a memory, a warning. And whether Rosa knew it or not, she had brought more than new life into this house. She had brought the past back with her. Jonas didn't know what would come next. But for now, the child was sleeping. Rosa was alive. And the storm, both outside and inside, had not yet passed. Rosa spent the first 2 days after the birth barely leaving the cot, her body still recovering from the ordeal. Jonas moved about the cabin with a quiet that wasn't natural for him. He had grown used to solitude over the years, his routines carved into him like grooves on an old table. Feed the stock, mend the fence, cook his own supper, sleep without dreaming. Now there was a woman in his bed and a baby in his house, and everything felt like it had been rearranged. He didn't complain aloud, but he noticed how his hands hesitated when they reached for things, how his mind drifted back to memories he had locked away. He watched Rosa when she thought he wasn't looking, how she checked the baby's breathing even in her sleep, how she whispered in Spanish as if prayers could build a wall around them. The baby's silver-gray eyes followed him every time he walked past. It was unnatural, that gaze. Not just alert, but knowing, like an echo of a man he had once faced across a gambling table. Jonas told himself he was imagining it, but the past has a way of refusing to stay buried, and he could feel the weight of it pressing against his ribs like an old wound. By the 3rd day, Rosa had enough strength to sit at the table, the baby cradled against her chest. Jonas poured her coffee without asking if she wanted it. She sipped slowly, her hands still trembling. "You keep looking at her like she's a ghost," she said finally, not accusing, just observing. Jonas sat down opposite, his fingers lacing and unlacing. "Her eyes," he said. "They're not like yours." Rosa blinked, pulling the blanket higher around the baby's face. "They're her father's," she murmured. Jonas felt a prickle crawl up his spine. He hadn't asked about the father, hadn't wanted to know, but now he did. "Tell me," he said, voice low. "Tell me who he is." She hesitated, then met his gaze squarely. "His name was Cristo. That's all he gave me. Cristo." The name hit Jonas like a blow. Cristo. The same man who had been called Cristo Cordero in some towns, Cristo Mendoza in others, Miguel's cousin, partner, shadow. Jonas had killed Miguel Cordero in a filthy alley behind a saloon, and he had thought that was the end of it. But Cristo had slipped away. Now here he was again, a ghost in a child's eyes. Jonas gripped his mug so hard it nearly cracked. Rosa noticed. "You know him," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Jonas forced himself to lean back, breathing through his nose. "I knew a man," he said finally. "Dangerous, mean. Would charm you out of your last dollar and then gut you for sport?" Rosa's lips pressed tight. "He wasn't like that with me," she said. "He was kind. He said he wanted a family, a home. He left before I could tell him I was carrying." Her voice faltered then, and Jonas saw the shadow cross her face. Shame, regret, hope, all tangled. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that men like Christo didn't change. But looking at her, he couldn't. Maybe he was kind, Jonas said, but he wasn't safe. Not for you, not for her. Rosa clutched the baby tighter, her knuckles white. Thomas knew, she whispered, naming the husband she'd lost. He married me anyway. He gave her his name. Jonas nodded once, slowly. It was an act of mercy he understood but rarely saw. For a moment neither of them spoke. The baby stirred and opened those pale eyes again, and Jonas felt the past crawl closer. That night Jonas couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire cleaning a rifle he hadn't touched in years. The wood was still oiled, the metal still smooth under his hands. He told himself it was just a precaution. A man had a right to be ready, but the truth was uglier. He had buried the gun because he wanted to be done with killing. But the moment Rosa said Christo's name, he had felt the old instinct stir. He remembered Miguel Cordero lying in the dirt, eyes wide and surprised, whispering something Jonas never translated. He remembered hearing rumors later. Miguel had a brother, a cousin, a partner. They had vowed revenge. He remembered the pale eyes glinting through a haze of cigar smoke, and now that glint was in his house. Jonas loaded the rifle slowly, as if each bullet carried a memory he couldn't unload. He set it aside but within reach, staring at it like a snake he might have to grab. When Rosa woke for the baby's feeding, she found Jonas still at the table, gun parts spread out before him. "You're preparing for someone," she said quietly. Jonas didn't look up. "I'm preparing for what I know is coming." She sat across from him, the baby drowsy against her shoulder. "Christo won't come," she said, though it sounded like a question. "He's gone." Jonas gave a bitter laugh. "Gone doesn't mean safe. Gone doesn't mean forgotten." She reached across the table, touching his hand lightly. "I didn't bring trouble here on purpose." He met her eyes then, the first time that night. "I know," he said, "but trouble doesn't care about purpose." Rosa drew back, silent. The baby opened her pale eyes again, staring at Jonas, and he stared back until Rosa shifted uncomfortably and turned her away. It was a small movement, but it told him she had felt it too, that echo of someone neither of them wanted to name. By dawn, Jonas had the rifle assembled and leaning by the door, his revolver cleaned and holstered. He hated the feel of it against his hip. It was like putting back on a skin he'd shed. Rosa moved quietly about the cabin, her movements careful, her eyes avoiding the gun. Jonas watched her but said nothing. He had made his decision. The past had walked into his house in the shape of a woman and a baby, and now he was no longer just a man trying to live quietly. He was a man waiting for a knock he knew would come sooner or later. As the baby drifted back to sleep, her silver eyes closing at last, Jonas felt the weight of the gun like a verdict. He was preparing for a man he'd never truly killed. For Miguel Cordero's shadow, for Christo, for all of them. And whether Rosa understood it or not, he was preparing to kill again if he had to. He stared at the fire until it went to embers, his hand on the rifle, and thought of nothing but the eyes of the child who had brought it all back. Rosa adjusted quickly to life on the ranch in a way that surprised Jonas more than he cared to admit. For someone who had shown up drenched, in labor, and with haunted eyes, she was proving herself capable and steady. She wasn't fast, but she was deliberate, and stubborn when it mattered. On the fourth morning after the birth, she insisted on joining Jonas outside despite his protest. "I'm not broken," she told him plainly, cinching her shawl tight across her chest, the baby strapped snugly to her back. "And if I'm going to stay here, I need to earn my place." There was no arguing with the way she said it. Jonas tried, twice, but she gave him that look, the one that said she'd already decided, and so he handed her a bucket and showed her where to spread feed. Watching her step through the dry pasture with the baby asleep against her shoulder, he felt something shift again. Not sympathy, not pity, something heavier, something that made him uneasy. He had let her in because she was in trouble, and he had helped her because it was right. But now she was becoming part of the place. That was different. That meant risk. She didn't stop there. Over the following days, Rosa asked questions, watched closely, and picked up more than he expected. She asked about cattle, about saddles, about how to tell if a horse was faking a limp to get out of work, and she listened when he answered. When she wasn't tending to Elena or checking supplies, She practiced lifting the lighter tools in the barn. Jonas caught her doing it once and raised an eyebrow. "Next you'll be branding calves," he said dryly. "Not today," she replied, grinning. "But maybe next week." It wasn't just chores. One morning she pointed to the rifle by the door. "You're gonna teach me how to use that?" He paused, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. "I don't want to shoot anyone," she said. "But I've learned not to wait for someone else to protect me." Jonas hesitated, but in the end, he brought out the smaller revolver, the one his late wife had once used, and showed her how to handle it. Her hands were steady. She had a natural way of standing, strong and grounded. He said nothing, but later that evening he checked the rifle again, cleaned it a second time. Rosa wasn't just learning how to live. She was preparing to survive. Their conversations deepened in ways Jonas hadn't expected. It started simple, with Rosa teaching him how to make cinnamon bread. The first time, she pulled a small jar from her bag, sealed with wax. "My mother's spice blend," she said. "I never travel without it." Jonas was skeptical, but she walked him through the steps. Yeast, flour, patience. He was a mess in the kitchen, but she laughed at him, not unkindly, and let him fail until the loaf rose properly. The scent that filled the cabin was something new, not just pleasant, grounding. That night, they ate together in silence, and Jonas couldn't remember the last time a meal had felt like more than just fuel. After dinner, she spoke about her childhood on the border, her father's silence after her mother's death, and the way she'd learned to keep going no matter what. Jonas found himself talking back, not about guns or fights, but about the years after he walked away from it all. "I was a ghost," he said quietly. "I didn't live, just stayed alive." Rosa looked at him without pity. "Maybe now you can do both." He didn't reply, but the words stayed with him. Things began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings with chores, afternoons with the baby, evenings with quiet company. Rosa didn't ask about his past, and Jonas didn't press about hers. But there was an unspoken understanding. Both of them carried something heavy. One morning, while Rosa stitched a tear in one of his shirts, she said, "You don't have to be scared of letting people in. Not everyone wants to take something from you." Jonas didn't answer right away. He looked at her, at the curve of her back, the quickness of her hands, the baby gurgling quietly in the sling. "I've let people in before," he said finally. "Didn't end well." Rosa nodded without looking up. This might be different. It was such a simple sentence, but it hung in the air like a dare. Jonas didn't know what scared him more, that she believed it, or that he was starting to believe it too. That night, he sat on the porch alone, rifle resting against the wall behind him, and watched the edge of the valley as if expecting something. He didn't know what, but some part of him knew peace was never permanent, not for people like him. Then it happened, not loud, not dramatic, but enough to jolt him back to the man he used to be. Rosa was inside putting the baby to sleep when Jonas spotted the figure. Far off, just a speck at first, near the horizon where the sky met the plain. He narrowed his eyes. Whoever it was wore a long coat and moved slowly, deliberately. A horse trailed behind them. Jonas stood without a word, stepping down from the porch. The wind wasn't strong, but it kicked up just enough dust to blur the figure's outline. Still, he knew danger when he saw it. A hood was drawn up, obscuring the face. That alone was enough to raise his pulse. Rosa opened the door behind him, sensing his tension. "What is it?" she asked. Jonas didn't take his eyes off the figure. "Someone's coming," he said, voice flat. "Someone who doesn't want to be seen yet." She stepped closer, but he held out a hand. "Stay inside. Lock the back door." She didn't argue. She knew that tone, and maybe she'd seen the look in his eyes once before. Jonas picked up the rifle, the wood familiar in his grip. The silence of the plain wasn't silence anymore. It was a warning. It was just before dusk when the riders came. Jonas had been tending to the fence on the southern edge of the property when he caught sight of the dust trail. 3 horses, well-fed and fast, moved with intent. The way they fanned out told him they weren't merchants or drifters. This was a formation, deliberate, practiced. He didn't wait. He saddled his own horse halfway, then changed his mind and walked back to the cabin. Rosa was outside by the well, pouring water into a basin while humming softly to Elena. The moment she saw Jonas's face, her song died. Something's wrong, she said, voice low. Stay inside, Jonas told her. Now. She didn't argue. Her instincts were sharp now, sharpened by fear and motherhood. Jonas retrieved his rifle and stood by the front steps, waiting. He didn't have to wait long. The three men approached without speaking, their horses snorting from the climb. When they dismounted, Jonas knew who they were before they introduced themselves. The resemblance was uncanny. The bone structure, the cold eyes, the posture. Cordero, he muttered under his breath. And then, aloud, to the one in front. You Diego? The man nodded, smiling like it meant nothing. She's here, isn't she? He asked. Jonas said nothing at first. His grip on the rifle tightened, but it remained lowered. Diego stepped forward slowly, removing his gloves, looking not at Jonas, but at the window beside the door. The girl, he said calmly. The one with Miguel's eyes. Rosa had told Jonas weeks ago that Cristo, the baby's father, never gave her a last name. But Jonas didn't need it. The bloodline was obvious. Cristo, Miguel, Diego. They all carried that silver gaze like a curse. You're not taking her, Jonas said. His voice was low, steady. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Diego's smile didn't fade, but it thinned. I think you misunderstand. We're not here to steal. We're here to claim. The man to his left shifted, hand near his coat. Probably a pistol there. Jonas didn't blink. She's not yours, he said. She's not Miguel's. She's not anyone's but Rosa's. At that, Diego finally looked at him. You really think blood doesn't matter? He asked. You think names and stories change who we are? Jonas felt his heart beat once, slow and heavy. I know what your name means, and I know what you want, but she's not growing up with men like you. That's not happening. He almost told her to stay back, but Rosa walked out slowly, Elena in her arms. She stood beside him, her shoulders tense but her eyes clear. Jonas stepped half a pace forward as if to shield her, but Rosa held her ground. Diego's gaze shifted to her, and for the first time, his calm faltered. She has our eyes, he said, voice almost reverent. And our blood, that makes her one of us. Rosa shook her head once. No, she said firmly. She has my hands, my laugh, my stories, and she'll have my strength. Her voice didn't shake. Elena stirred, sensing the tension, and Rosa bounced her gently. Whatever Miguel gave her died with him. I'm what she has now. The third Cordero brother, the youngest, took a step forward. You think you can just keep her hidden? Rosa's expression didn't change. She's not hidden. She's home. Jonas glanced at her then, just for a second, and saw a fire in her he hadn't seen even during the birth. It wasn't panic. It was purpose. The kind of strength that doesn't yell or fight unless it absolutely must. And in that moment he realized that Rosa wasn't just protecting Elena. She was choosing her. Diego let silence settle between them before he spoke again. You don't understand what this means. Miguel didn't just leave a child. He left an heir. Our family doesn't just walk away from blood. We build legacies. That girl belongs to a name that carries weight, power, connections. Rosa's lip curled, and this time her voice did rise just slightly. You mean fear. You mean control. You mean taking something pure and turning it into what you are. Diego spread his arms. She'll be protected, provided for, raised with more than this shack and your stubborn pride. Jonas stepped forward, rifle still at his side but the edge of his patience showing. She's got more here than she ever would with you. She's got peace, a chance. He stared at Diego without blinking. You want to take that from her, you'll have to go through me. The youngest brother looked ready to draw. Diego held out a hand. Not today, he said, still watching Jonas. We came to talk first. Jonas narrowed his eyes. And now you've talked. So ride. The brothers didn't move at first, but Diego finally nodded, backing away. As they mounted their horses, Diego looked at Rosa one last time. You're brave, he said, but brave doesn't make you safe. Rosa held Elena tighter. Neither does being born with your eyes. Jonas stepped between them, ending the exchange. The riders turned and trotted toward the horizon. They didn't ride hard, not like men who had been beaten. They rode like men who would come back. Jonas watched until they disappeared from view. Only then did he lower the rifle. Rosa stood beside him, her breathing tight but steady. He looked at her, not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who had drawn a line in the dirt and dared anyone to cross it. "You didn't have to come out," he said. "Yes," she answered. "I did." Jonas studied her for a long moment. "You scared?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "But I'm still standing, and I'll keep standing for her." She looked down at Elena, then back at him. "She's my daughter, Jonas. I don't care who claims her. I will fight for her." Jonas didn't reply right away. He looked at her differently now. Not like a guest, not like a burden, but like someone forged from the same iron as himself. Stronger, maybe. He didn't say any of that. Instead, he nodded once and looked back toward the hills. The Cordero brothers were gone, for now, but they had left their mark. Not in violence, not yet, but in what they represented. A world that refused to let go. Jonas felt the old pressure rise in his chest, but he looked at Rosa again and felt something else too. Not fear, not regret, respect. She hadn't just faced down a legacy of violence. She'd claimed her place in the path forward, quietly, fiercely, and without apology. The rifle remained in Jonas's hands, but he realized something as he watched her carry Elena back into the cabin. Her courage had eclipsed the memory of every scar he carried, and that mattered more than anything. They both knew it was coming. The Cordero brothers hadn't ridden off to disappear. They had ridden off to plan. Jonas had spent the last 2 nights barely sleeping, pacing from window to door and back again, watching the hills. Rosa watched him too, never asking him to stop. She understood in her own way. When he finally said, "It's time," she didn't ask what he meant. She nodded, kissed Elena on the forehead, and started clearing the kitchen floor. Jonas pulled the old iron stove away from the wall with a grunt, revealing a shallow pit beneath it. Rosa knelt and lined it with 2 thick blankets. "She'll be warm," she whispered. But scared. Jonas knelt beside her, the revolver tucked at his back and a rifle leaning against the counter. "You'll be back for her," he said, though he didn't say what would happen if she wasn't. Elena was already half asleep, unaware of what waited outside. Rosa placed her down gently, covered her, then lowered the panel of wood they had prepared together. She stood and looked at Jonas. "Whatever happens," she said, "they're not taking her." Jonas met her eyes and nodded. "They'll have to go through both of us." Rosa loaded the short-barrel shotgun Jonas had once kept for coyotes. She held it like she had held the baby, with both care and intention. The sky was already dimming when the first horse crested the ridge, then the second, then the third. They didn't bother sneaking this time. They wanted to be seen. Jonas counted the seconds between their arrival and when they dismounted. It wasn't bravado, it was certainty. These were men who had decided how this night would end. They just hadn't realized how wrong they were. "McRae," Diego called. "We gave you a chance." Jonas didn't answer. Rosa stood just behind the cabin wall, out of sight but within earshot. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't waver. "We're taking what's ours," Diego shouted again. "Last warning." Still no reply. Then a single shot rang out. Not from them, but from Jonas. It cracked across the field and shattered Miguel Cordero's shoulder, sending him backward in a spray of blood. And just like that, the standoff exploded into gunfire. The first minutes were chaos. Rosa stayed low and moved around the back of the cabin, using the narrow space between the structure and the corral to get into position. Jonas kept firing from the porch, pinning the riders behind a wagon. One of them, the youngest, managed to circle wide, firing into the window where Elena had once been. Jonas swore and ducked as splinters flew. He took a shot in the side, sharp and punishing. Rosa saw him stumble but didn't call out. She had no breath to spare. She took aim, waited for the right moment, and fired. The short shotgun roared, and the youngest Cordero dropped mid-step, dead before he hit the dirt. She ran to Jonas, crouching beside him. "Still breathing," he muttered. "Get back inside." She shook her head. "You're bleeding." He coughed, then laughed, blood in his teeth. "You noticed." Another shot cracked near them. Rosa pulled him behind the porch post and picked up the rifle. "Cover me," she said, and moved before he could argue. Diego realized then that he had underestimated them. He stood from behind the wagon and began firing wild, trying to flush them out. Rosa, calm now, leveled the rifle and fired once. She missed. He ran toward the cabin, yelling something in Spanish she couldn't make out. Jonas tried to rise but fell again. Rosa met Diego head-on in the clearing. She fired, missed again, then ducked as he returned fire. The next bullet tore through her dress but missed flesh. She stepped forward, fearless. He hesitated, just for a second, and that was all she needed. She closed the distance, aimed low, and pulled the trigger. The blast tore into his thigh, knocking him off balance. He tried to recover, but Jonas had pulled himself to one knee and fired the final shot. Diego spun, dropped his pistol, and hit the ground hard. He was alive, barely, but he wasn't getting up. Blood darkened the dirt around him. Rosa approached with her weapon raised. He looked up at her, hatred in his teeth. "She'll never be safe," he spat. "Someone will come." Rosa didn't answer. She just looked down at him, and for the first time, he looked away. Jonas sat against the porch post, breathing shallow. Rosa knelt beside him and checked the wound. "Went through," she said. "Messy but clean." He gave her a crooked smile. "You handled yourself." She pressed fabric against his side. "We both did." They waited, rifles ready. But no more shots came. Only silence. After 10 long minutes, Rosa stood, shotgun still in hand, and walked the perimeter. She found one of the Cordero brothers dead, the other bleeding and unconscious. The third, Miguel, had managed to crawl toward his horse, and though she had every reason to stop him, Rosa let him go. He looked back once, hatred and fear in his eyes, then vanished into the dusk. She didn't chase him, not out of mercy, but because she had nothing left to prove. She returned to the cabin, her hands bloody, her legs shaking. Jonas was trying to stand, grunting against the pain. "You should rest," she said. "So should you," he replied. But neither of them moved. They just stood there, two people who had fought through something no one else would ever truly understand. Then Rosa pulled the stove aside and dropped to her knees. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the wooden cover. Elena was awake, eyes wide but silent, as if even at her young age she understood the night had changed something. Rosa reached in and lifted her daughter into her arms, holding her close. The baby let out a soft sound, a mix between a sigh and a cry. Jonas leaned against the wall, watching them. Rosa looked down at Elena, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her arms stained with blood. She rocked the child slowly, whispering words in Spanish that Jonas couldn't quite hear. Her voice cracked once, then again, and finally the tears came. She didn't sob. She didn't collapse. She cried the way someone cries when they've done what had to be done and still carry the weight of it. Jonas wanted to speak, to say something useful, but no words came. There was nothing to say. The night had gone quiet. The fight was over. And in the middle of the silence, Rosa held her daughter close, her bloodied hands cradling the only thing that mattered. Months passed, and the land began to reflect something it hadn't in years: life. The fences were mended, the animals fed and calm, and crops once forgotten began to sprout in small rows along the edges of the pasture. The farmhouse no longer felt like a hiding place, but a home. Jonas moved slower these days. The wound he took in the fight against the Corderos never fully healed, and though the bleeding had stopped, the pain lingered. He now walked with a cane he carved himself, a thick piece of oak polished smooth from hours of sanding. But he didn't complain, not once. Most days he spent his time in the shed, measuring, cutting, and hammering wood into something new. It wasn't a barn or a gate, but a crib, a new one, bigger, stronger. He was meticulous about it, redoing joints when they didn't align just right. "You act like she'll be a blacksmith by 6 months," Rosa teased one afternoon, holding loose in her arms as Jonas fit the side rails into place. He didn't smile, just nodded. "She's got fire in her," he said. "Best we build something that lasts." And he meant it. Not just the crib, everything. Rosa had changed too. Not in body. She remained full-figured and strong, but in the way she carried herself. The haunted weight that once sat behind her eyes had been replaced by something rooted and unshakable. She rose before the sun each morning, checked the chickens, hauled feed for the livestock, and turned the soil in a section of land they had agreed to call hers. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Jonas had offered help, and she had accepted only once, when the wheelbarrow broke a spoke. "I don't need to prove anything," she'd told him. "I just want to make it grow." And she did. Her hands, once swollen from childbirth, now bore fresh calluses. Her back ached from honest work, not grief. Luz grew stronger by the week, her giggles echoing in the house during supper, her cries sharp and demanding when she wanted to be held. The silver eyes that had once unnerved Jonas were now a part of their daily lives. He found himself drawn to them, not because they reminded him of the past, but because they didn't anymore. They had become Luz's own, curious, stubborn, bright. "She watches everything," Rosa would say, "like she's memorizing the world before it changes." The baby was chewing on a cloth doll Rosa had stitched together from old linen scraps. "You think she remembers it?" he asked quietly. Rosa looked down at Luz, then at him. "The night of the fight?" He nodded. "No," she said. "But I do." There was a long pause between them, filled with unsaid things. Finally, Rosa added, "And that's enough." Jonas accepted that. He didn't push. He had learned that some wounds don't need salt, and some truths don't need revisiting. He stood slowly, back aching, and placed the last spindle in place. The crib was finished. Solid, real, and for the first time in his life, Jonas felt like he had made something that would outlive him. "It's good," Rosa said. "Better than good." He gave a quiet grunt and sat back down. Luz reached for the side of the crib, her tiny hands gripping the rails. "She'll walk before winter," Rosa said with a smirk. "Then we're in trouble." Jonas chuckled, a dry, rare sound. "We're already in trouble. She's got your fire and my stubborn. Poor world." This time he locked it, then dropped the key into a small tin which he buried behind the tool shed. Not out of shame, but choice. He wasn't that man anymore. He had made peace with it. Rosa watched him from the porch but didn't comment. That night they ate dinner with Luz bouncing between them, grabbing at everything with her fierce little fingers. After the meal, Rosa took the baby to the bedroom while Jonas cleaned the dishes, humming low under his breath. It was a simple life, but it was theirs. There were no guarantees. The world outside still held shadows, but here, in this piece of earth they had fought for, there was room to grow. Rosa returned from the bedroom and handed him a folded piece of paper. "I've started writing," she said. "Nothing fancy, just thoughts." Jonas took it carefully, nodding. "Good," he replied. "Write it down. That way, when she asks who she is, we'll have something more than scars to show her." Rosa wrote in it every few days, sometimes in the middle of the night when Luz refused to sleep, other times after the sun had burned her skin and her bones ached from tending the land. She didn't write about the gunfight. Not directly. She didn't write about Miguel Cordero or Diego, or the years she'd spent hiding from her own reflection. She wrote about Luz, about Jonas, about the bread recipe that finally worked without her mother's spice mix. She wrote about fear, not as something shameful, but as something that taught her when to act. And in one quiet entry, she wrote something she hadn't said aloud yet. "Strength is not in the size of a woman's body," she wrote. "It's in the weight she chooses to carry. It's in the way she protects what she loves without waiting to be asked. It's in saying no to what breaks you, and yes to what heals." Then she closed the journal, placed it back in the drawer, and sat on the porch, watching the sun slip behind the hills. As night settled in, Rosa rocked Luz in her arms, humming a quiet tune, neither lullaby nor prayer. Jonas sat nearby, legs stretched, cane leaning beside him, and eyes half closed in calm. The baby's silver eyes blinked slowly, sleep crawling in. Rosa looked down at her daughter and smiled, not with triumph but with quiet pride. She didn't think of what might come tomorrow, not tonight. Luz was safe. Jonas was healing. The house was whole. The past had demanded everything it could from them: pain, blood, fear. But they had answered with love, grit, and refusal. In the porch light, the baby's eyes flickered like coins underwater. Once those eyes had meant danger. Now they meant something else entirely: possibility. The woman who had arrived at this house half broken, with nothing but a name and a child growing inside her, had built a home. And the man who had once believed he could only destroy had helped her do it. Together, they had taken what was cursed and turned it into something sacred. Rosa held her daughter closer, one hand over Luz's chest, and whispered, "This is your world now. Hit that like button, subscribe to Souls of the Old West, and drop a comment telling us what part hit you hardest. And hey, send this to someone who needs a good tale of redemption and fire. We'll see you on the next trail."